Hi, Emma. Welcome to the show. It is such a pleasure to have you here today.
Happy to be here.
I am thrilled. And I was telling you earlier, I am so excited and anticipatory of this conversation. This is, regular conversation for me, but still today I think that some of this stuff is, a little bit hard to talk about. I tend to talk about it often on social media and so forth, but that doesn't come without a price. So today, hopefully, we can have a really awesome discussion and outline some of this stuff for our listeners and, try to clear up some confusion about what it means to not only go through flu season and what happens when you're getting sick and all the, preventative measures and so forth. So I'm very excited.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah. Well, why don't we tap into a little bit of your background before we get going? I was very interested when you told me that you were an actuary. I actually had never heard of that term, and I don't think I'm alone. So, why don't you give us a little bit of a snapshot of your history? Also, how did you get to writing a book and so forth?
Okay, so yeah, that's what actually it's a profession. So we're very good with data. We have a lot of exams to take, but I started out about 30 years ago now working in the pensions field. So we're typically involved with risk. So when you're thinking about a pension in the old days when people used to work for an employer for 20, 30, 40 years, you want to make sure the employer is putting money away now that's going to be able to pay your pension for the rest of your life once you retire. And so that's a risk of, when somebody retires at 65, how long are they going to live? So that's kind of what an actuary is. And then there's actuaries involved in other kinds of insurance and life insurance and health insurance and things like that. So that's where I started my career 30 or so years ago in the UK. And I was working mainly with pension plans and employers that were setting up pension plans. And then I just wanted to move to the US. I just got frustrated with the UK and the weather. So I moved to the US and I wanted to branch out a little bit. So I started working with some really big employers, some of the biggest in the world, all sort of household names that you've heard of. And I worked for a big consulting firm, a big global consulting firm. And in addition to pensions and the pension plans all over the world, I started getting into other forms of employee benefits. So healthcare, life insurance, things like that. And then while I was doing all of this about 15 years ago, my then older son, who was about 5 at the time, was diagnosed with Asperger's and ADHD. And he had been a very sickly kid for years. He had gastrointestinal issues and constant ear infections and just sick all the time and just really struggling. And then when he's in kindergarten and he's disruptive, the school asked me to get him evaluated. So I got the diagnosis, and it was kind of like a light bulb moment. I think I always knew that that's where he was heading, but it sort of changed the trajectory of my career a little bit. So I became more focused on healthcare, and I moved into the health side of the business, the company that I was working for. And so then I was working really focused on developing health solutions and health services that these big employers could take advantage of in different countries. And then COVID comes along, and I'm mainly at the time I was mainly working outside the US. I was working with US multinationals, but for their employees all in different countries. And so I'm working, we have doctors all over the world on staff and nurses and all sorts of different folks. And we're all talking about COVID, obviously, and how we're going to address it. And even back then, I'd be hearing doctors in Latin America that would talk about things like ivermectin and antiparasitic. And oh, it seems to be really efficacious for COVID. And the first clinical trials came out in like May 2020, showing how helpful this was. And I'm like, okay, great, let's get this to our clients. And in a lot of countries, that was all well and good, and talking about supplements and keeping your body healthy. And then I talked to colleagues in the US, and they're like, oh, no, we can't talk about that. And it was just crazy. And with everything that I'd been through with my son that we might get into, and how to get him healthy and maybe what had caused his problems, it just the light was going on for me that this is just it's the wrong way to go, and we're not helping our clients. And so I thought I wanted to get there's a lot of detail that people need to understand. You can't just say, oh, vaccines are bad and pharmaceuticals are bad, and this is going to work. You've got to really help people understand. There's a lot of detail. And so I decided I needed to write all this down, and I need to write a book to explain it to people. And as I was developing the outline for the book, I was kind of learning to write, if you like, because I hadn't really, haven't got any formal training in journalism or writing or anything. So as I was doing all the outline, I figured out that, I can't do both. And it was becoming increasingly difficult for me in the corporate world with the things I was wanting to say, hey, this is going to help our clients reduce healthcare costs. And folks, especially in the US and in our leadership, were saying, no, no, you can't say that. And so it just became too difficult. And so I took the leap and I said, okay, I'm going to leave. So I left the corporate world last year, about 18 months ago now. And just focused on the book, and that's what I'm doing. I'm still doing some independent consulting, and some health solutions, and some employers that want to address health for their employees differently. But that's how I came about to write the book.
I love that. And, you said a couple of things that you said that I think are really important is one, you said, it's really important that people understand because, and I think that that is so true today because I think that people look irrational or they look, they don't take others seriously when they just throw out blanket statements like, all vaccines are bad or this is all this. And,
Right.
whether or not that's true or not is actually not even the point. The
Right.
point is that we have to have data, we
Right.
have to have
Right.
information.
Right.
And so it's important that, there is real factual information out there that people can be pointed to. And, it's, and then, well, okay, and we're going to get into this. What's sad is that a lot of that is suppressed, so it's really important that people like you, with your book, and then there's others, and I know we were sort of talking about this off air, who have really put stuff out there that is not even opinionated. It's just factual data. It's just
Right.
that stuff has
Right.
unfortunately been covered up. And we'll get into more of that in a second. And the other thing I just wanted to say is that, and for the listeners, I just have to just want to throw this out there is that she said she had no formal training with writing, but I have read portions of Emma's book, and she is such a fantastic writer. So I'm just throwing that out there right now. Yeah, we'll talk more about the book, but you are such an exceptional writer. I can't believe you've only written, that
Well,
what you're
I
working
always
on
did
is.
writing. I mean, my
Yeah.
colleagues were like the emails that I used to send to people, these really long emails. So yeah, I did writing and materials that we put out, but not, as I say, just not formal training.
Right.
And I think I'm told that I write as I speak. So it's like I'm
Mm.
having a conversation with you, and
Yeah.
it just comes through my brain, through my fingers onto the page.
Well, you are an amazing writer. So yeah, definitely, definitely. And I'm, like I said, I'm not through with your book yet. I still have some, ways to go, but I will definitely be finishing it. So let's move. I know we're going to branch into a couple different regions or directions today with, flu season and the flu vaccine. And then we're kind of sort of going to tinker with the other vaccines as well and throw out some real information, some real data, not opinionated. But I think it's a good foundational place to start with this upcoming season. It's a perfect time to have this discussion. We're heading straight in. Thanksgiving is in a few days. And by the time this airs, we have passed Thanksgiving already. But, there's a lot of misconceptions still in 2024
Right.
about why people get sick, what is actually the cause of somebody getting the flu or the common cold and
Right.
so forth. And I think that you have a lot of great information that is very helpful. So why don't you just kind of touch on this to
Yeah.
start?
Yeah, well, I mean, it goes back to like the 1800s, and I think maybe your listeners have heard of germ theory, and just basically there was this theory that there's microbes and they make us sick, and we know that there are some that will make us sick, and so they were, the microscope was being invented, and we could see these things that were really really small, and so this was the theory, and it was sort of one for one. There's a particular kind of a bug, and it's going to make people sick. But what a lot of people don't know is around the same time there was another theory coming out of France. So Louis Pasteur was the father of germ theory. He created pasteurization of milk, so there's not bacteria in it, and it won't make you sick. But then there was another guy called Beauchamp, and he was in the same scientific institute in France, but he wasn't as well connected as Pasteur. And he's like, well, yeah, I know there's microbes, but actually, I think it's how your body is doing as to whether you're actually going to be susceptible to that particular microbe making you ill. And so we call that terrain theory. The terrain is your body, and if your body's not healthy through bad lifestyle, usually you're taking in toxins and you're not getting enough nutrients. Back in those days, a lot of people weren't getting access to fruits and vegetables, and so they were nutrient deficient, and then they were much more susceptible to some sort of bug that was pathogenic. And so as we fast forward now into sort of the 20th century, then we became more aware of the microbiome, especially the last, I would say, 10 to 20 years. We're becoming aware that this is this thing called the microbiome, which on our bodies, on our skin, and very much inside our bodies in our guts, there's all these microbes that are actually very helpful to us. So they help us create hormones and neurotransmitters. And if our microbiome is damaged, then we're going to have symptoms. We're actually going to get sick. So these two theories kind of grew up, the germ theory and then learning about microbiome. They've sort of been put into silos, and we need to bring them together. That it's not all about the pathogenic bacteria or viruses and they're going to make us sick, and it's a one for one. It's much more complex than that. And even I lay out in my book as much as bringing all of these things together, but none of us know, because we've been incredibly designed by God and all of this to work together, all of nature to work together. When we actually see what the microbes are doing for us, I mean, they found, there's a recent scientific article, and you can go on PubMed and look at this stuff, that they figured out that bacteria in our guts help us make white blood cells. I mean, it's crazy all the what bugs, the good things that bugs can do for us. So to just dismiss all bugs as bad is far too short-sighted. And so we can say we're going to bring together germ theory and terrain theory. That's certainly part of it. Bring together our really very sort of virgin understanding of the microbiome. It's so new, the microbiome. We know it needs to be diverse. We know we can damage it. We can get into things like antibiotics and other pharmaceuticals can damage your microbiome. We know some of it, but we don't know what is a good microbiome. And if we take two different people that have very different microbiomes, we can test and kind of see what's going on inside, what different kind of bacteria and viruses and parasites are in there. But we can't for certain say, well, that's good and that's bad, because a lot of it depends on the balance. So something like H. pylori is a bacteria that a few years ago they decided it causes stomach ulcers. Well, many people have H. pylori inside them, and it doesn't do any harm at all, because they've got plenty of good bugs that are kind of keeping it in check. And so we're learning some of this, that what is bad for somebody may not be bad for somebody else. And so it's much more complex as to what's going to make us sick, and it's not just the microbes. It's the health of our body, and then it's our lifestyle, and we can get all of this. But it's really comes from the divine, comes from God, and that's not woo-woo stuff. That's just fact. That's just reality. There's tons of science that backs all this up, and but people like to focus on, I just want to take a pill. If I'm not feeling well, I don't have the time to rest and do some of the natural remedies that we'll talk about. I just want to take a pill and then move on with my life. And you've just got to, it's just not going to be the right thing for you long term if you just do that one for one. Okay, I'm just going to take a pill.
Yeah. Yeah. I love it. So well said. I say this every show, so, forgive the broken record, my friends, but it's the programming that we're under. And I know we're going to continue to talk about sort of how the public and us as a collective has been programmed, but especially in the US, I find that we are just so focused on like the instant thing,
Yep.
or let's just, and I think that, I'm not going to say that all doctors, have it in for all of us and so forth. I do think there are some doctors that probably are, not walking down the best path, but it's like the way that they're trained just spills out to the public and so forth. And we've just been in this really sick, no pun intended, cycle of thinking when it comes to uh, getting well, staying well, and not getting, not just jumping to. I don't know. I feel as though I almost like I can go into 50 different directions here, but all that to say, I just feel as though people are unfortunately just stuck. A lot of people still in today's world are just stuck in this really one highway type of thinking. Just give me the thing. I need it to work. And they don't want to look deeper because that's challenging for them in some way,
Yeah.
and it's no shade. I think everybody's got a path and a journey, but it
Yeah.
really is time. I said this on a recent episode. It really is time that we all wake up and take some accountability, because at the end of the day, our health is our
Yeah.
responsibility. And we're going to start,
Absolutely.
we're definitely going to get into more of that. And also, I I want to parallel something really quick in terms of the microbiome. One of the things when I was listening to you speak about how, the bugs are not all bad and how they work and sort of just, it's like a symbiotic type of a situation.
Yeah,
The same goes for parasites. There's a lot of
yeah,
information coming out about parasitic activity.
yeah,
And when
yeah,
people hear parasites, they
yeah,
automatically think, oh no, I have a
yeah,
parasite. Let's kill
yeah,
everything. And
yeah.
that's not true either because the reality is that we're full of parasites,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, back in the old days, like leeches, they put them on you, and they actually what they're putting into you can help your blood flow better. So
Yes.
yeah, all of the natural world, it's not all bad. There
Yeah.
are things that if we're not careful, yes, that can hurt us. But yeah, even parasites, even mold and fungi, right? So again, that's another one that people are sort of learning about. Oh, mold's really bad, and yes, if you've got mold in your house, that can really cause some illness. But there's the fungi family has some good qualities as well. So ergothionine, I don't know if did you have an episode
Yes.
ergothionine? So yeah, only comes from the fungi family
Yeah.
and mushrooms and we need our bodies need that. We've been able to show that our bodies need this molecule that is only created by the fungi family. So yeah, so all of it, you can't just pass off as being bad. We've got to
Yeah.
learn to live in harmony with the natural world.
That's right. It's all about balance. So let's talk a little bit about that balance and what happens when, so we're heading into the season, obviously. People are always talking about how, oh, got to stay away from, got to stay away from like large crowds or,
Yeah, yeah,
people are scared that they're going to get sick or, what if my kids bring things home or
yeah.
it's that whole thing, and a lot of times, unfortunately, I still hear it and see it so often, it really boggles my mind, is that when someone gets sick or has sniffles or their children get sniffles and they go to the doctor and the doctors give them a round of antibiotics just to be safe. Okay.
Yes.
I mean, come on, like
It's amazing.
I can't.
Yeah. Yeah.
But let's talk a little bit about antibiotics, the overuse of antibiotics, and what that does to our microbiome and our body long term, and what it does too in terms of like science and, pharmaceutical, the whole pharmaceutical realm.
Yeah, yeah, yes. I mean, if we go back to when the first antibiotics came out in the 1940s, and so we're just learning about bugs, and yes, people were dying from simple infections, and so yes, there's a reason we need them. This was great, but what has happened is that they've become like a catch-all, and it's because of germ theory. So it's because of that we still a lot of doctors are still in this mindset that there's a bug that makes you sick, and we've got to kill that bug. And the only thing that's going to kill that bug is a man-made product, an antibiotic. But it's not. Our bodies can heal themselves. You cut your finger and you keep it clean, it's going to heal. Even if it is a minor infection, but you start off with a cold or the flu, well, that's a virus. And so I think everybody knows by now. I like to think that, but as you say, I think some people still don't. It's a virus. So antibiotics aren't going to do anything for it at all. But a virus really stresses out your body, and so your body's working to fight the virus, and it can leave you more susceptible to opportunistic infections. So then you might have started off with a cold, and then you wind up with a sinus infection. And yes, there might be bacteria in your sinuses, but even then, it isn't automatic that you need antibiotics. Your body can fight all of this, and there's lots of natural remedies, which we'll get into, that are naturally antimicrobial. So, but when you take an antibiotic, so let's just say that you do have an actual infection. So you've got a sinus infection, there is bacteria in there, and the doctor gives you antibiotics. You take those antibiotics, it might help get at whatever the bacteria is in your sinuses or your ears, but it's also indiscriminately killing all the good bacteria in your gut. And there's some science out there that you can look at some of the papers. I think I've got a couple referenced in my book. There's tons of references in my book, by the way.
Yes.
And you can and it shows it's wiping out up to a third of your good bacteria and your microbiome. And especially, I get really upset when I see little children who are just building up their microbiomes when they're young. And it's hugely important for the development of their brain that all of this good bacteria is creating all those neurotransmitters. And then they take an antibiotic, which is just like taking a flamethrower to those little bodies. And you put it in, you're wiping out so much of the good bacteria. And it doesn't just come back tomorrow, especially if you're eating, like the standard American diet and you're not really taking in a lot of raw vegetables and raw fruits and these good foods that are going to help bring the good bacteria back to you, and plenty of fiber that's going to feed them, if you've wiped it all out with just one round of antibiotic, that can take up to a year of good eating to get that back again. And then in the meantime, you're going to have all of these other problems, and it's going to lead to generally an unbalanced body. And so then if you don't even have the infection to start with, so you don't even have something you're fighting and it's just precautionary, well, then that's even worse. And you're actually going to open yourself up to more different kinds of symptoms. And it's your microbiome and the strength of your microbiome that's going to stop you getting the next virus. So if you take an antibiotic, it's actually leaving you more susceptible to picking up something else in the next few weeks.
Yes, yes. I love that you said that too, because it can really, that alone, the antibiotic alone can be just the gateway, I should say, like
Yeah,
the open
yeah,
door to
yeah.
something else. And here you are, the average person, just thinking like, okay, well, it can't hurt me that much. It's probably going to help. But in reality, it might actually do the opposite. And this is not, I don't want to go to the extreme edge and say and demonize all antibiotics. I mean, look, and I'm sure you will agree, there's a time and a place for these things because they can be life saving in circumstances where they are actually necessary and needed. But in this country alone, and I don't know the statistics in other countries, the overuse and overprescription of these things is like it's a travesty. It's literally
It is.
it should be it's criminal in my opinion because
It is.
like you said with these children too. I mean, and I have personal experience as an adult. I went through like I would say close to a 10-year period of time where I was probably taking at one point, I probably took 11 or 12 rounds a year of antibiotics.
Oh,
Yes. And my health was in the toilet, not even the toilet, I'm the sewer.
that
And
is medical malpractice. I'm sorry. That is
oh, I
terrible.
agree with you. And and it's so hard like looking back, I've realized that, the doctors are doing what they think is
Right,
best and
right,
I
right,
get that. But
right.
it is just that they are not trained on what it takes to really fuel and help the body heal because it is, like you said, beautifully designed to heal itself given the right circumstances. And I also saw, which, I've seen some research on this alone, is that it doesn't just affect like your immune system, but it also affects your mental and emotional health because
Absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah.
I remember just going through horrible, horrible bouts and long-term bouts of depression and anxiety during this time. And
Mhm.
there is no doubt in my mind that antibiotic use had something
Yeah.
to do with it.
Yeah, there's a lot of side effects of antibiotics and the other pharmaceuticals. It's not just killing of the microbiome. They affect your neurotransmitters and they create nutrient deficiencies. So one of them is the B vitamins, absolutely critical for mental health and depression. And
Yes.
that, yeah, a lot of depression is caused by people that have had rounds of antibiotics, not even necessarily 10, but just a couple. And it can affect the brain. Have you heard of the term floxed? So
Yeah.
one category of antibiotics, and the fluoroquines. I'm not saying that right, I don't think, but one particular category, they're quite strong, and they're very well known for creating delusional thoughts and imbalance. And they've deemed it now you've been floxed. And yeah, so a lot of different kinds of antibiotics have all different kinds of side effects in the body, and we just think they're going to take it, it's going to get rid of that infection, and off I go with my life. And it's not. It just really throws your body out of balance and can lead to lots of other problems.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think for some people who are listening, they probably, or maybe they have been privy to some of this information, but some of it, is hard to digest in a way because it makes you almost mad, or angry. Like, "Ah, gosh, we've been led so astray." And it's not just like, I love how you said earlier, this is not woo woo, it's really not. Like, we have become so removed from what it takes to not just heal and have patience with our body, but with nature, with the way that God has designed our bodies is so spectacular and we just don't give it a chance. We underestimate things. We want things instantaneously. And we've been miseducated,
Yes.
on all of it.
Yeah.
What would you say to someone who, say, was taking themselves or their child to the doctor and the doctor is just like, well, here, take this, or, here's a prescription for amoxicillin, or here's,
Yeah.
Cipro, which is,
Yeah.
woof, stay away from that stuff.
Yeah.
and you should probably take this as a precautionary, just to be safe, especially because it's December now and everybody's sick. So
Yeah.
what tip would you give someone
Yeah.
who's in that predicament or that situation?
Yeah, you don't have to do what the doctor says. They're a human being that went through a particular mode of study and has a particular toolbox. You don't have to do what they say. I give you an example. Not from flu, but I got a bursa in my elbow. I don't know if anybody knows what that is. It's a huge
Mm-hmm.
infection. I woke up one morning and my elbow was probably 10 times the size. It was humongous and incredibly painful. And I didn't know what to do. It was bright red and hot, and I'd never had this before. And I did one of those telehealth. My plan gives me a telehealth, and I went on, and the doctor looked at it and goes, "Oh, you need antibiotics." I was like, "Do I?" I said, he said, "Oh, yes, that could get, that could get really bad." I said, "Well, am I going to lose my arm?" He goes, "Well, no, I don't think so." He said, "But you need to look out for like red streaks." And he told me what to look for. I said, "Well, if I'm not going to lose my arm, then I'd rather not take antibiotics." And he looked at me like I was completely crazy. I said, "Well, could I maybe put tea tree oil on it? Because that's an essential oil and it goes through the skin straight at the infection itself, and it doesn't go through messing up all my innards." And he just thought I was crazy. And he got off the phone like really quickly. But I was like, "Okay, well, thank you for your advice. That's very helpful to check that there weren't any red streaks and that it was going to get really bad. I didn't want to lose my arm." So I knew what to watch for. And then I went my own way, and I took loads of vitamin C, tons of vitamin C and vitamin D. I put tea tree oil, and I was fine a few days. But yeah, so if just because the doctor says that, and people can get nervous, and especially with their children, because yes, if you've been really, really sick with a fever for over 10 days and the fever's not broken, and you're delirious, then yes, it might have gotten out of hand because your body was otherwise compromised. And so yes, there might be occasions. But if you or your child is fine, other than they've got pain in their sinuses, pain in their ears, it can be extremely painful. Try some other things first. And you could even say, if you didn't want to upset the doctor, you could say, "Okay, well, thank you for the prescription. I'll hold on to it and see how I go." And then go try some other things, or we can get into what those other things would be. And just don't fill the prescription. You
Yeah.
don't have to do what that doctor says. It is useful. I'm not saying don't go to a doctor. It is useful to get things checked out, because, as I say, there could be an infection that gets really can put your life in jeopardy, or lose a limb or something like that. So
Yeah.
you do need to get it checked out, but you don't have to do what the particular doctor is saying.
Yeah, yeah. I think there's something to be said about intuition and discernment too. If you have a feeling, like, and you have to discern whether your feeling is fear-based or
Right.
whether it's actually intuition, that
Yeah.
that gut,
Yeah.
that gut
Yeah.
feeling. And you
Yeah.
and I would agree it's like the Holy
Yeah.
Spirit, right? It's like
Absolutely.
we just And I love that you said they're just a human being, because there's one thing that I always say during episodes where we talk about conventional medical doctors, and I've had plenty of them on here, is that it's not that we're condemning them. They are doing as they are trained. And some of them are
Absolutely.
more open minded than
Right.
others.
Right.
But they are, at the end of the day, just a human being. I'm getting ready to release a show on medical error in the hospitals. And being in patient advocacy, and it's like that show alone, this episode alone, highlights the fact that these people are just people in a system
Right.
that is designed
Right.
poorly, right? Doing sometimes the best they can and sometimes not, but they are humans making lots of mistakes.
Yeah.
Some of them are amazing and don't make a lot of mistakes, but there's both sides, so we just have to remember that at the end of the day, you
Right.
are in charge.
Absolutely.
You are in charge, whether it's you or whether it's your child, or even, if you're helping a spouse or someone
Yeah.
who you're caring for. So well said.
Yeah, and especially you're seeing that doctor for maybe 10 minutes,
You're
and
right.
they haven't been, they're not sitting in your body knowing how you've been for the last few days. You might say, "Well, I've had a fever for 2 days," but have you been delirious and literally can't get off the floor? Or are you a little hot? Don't be scared of a fever. A fever is your body doing its job.
Thank
There's,
you.
and please don't take Tylenol, and
Oh,
that puts pressure on your liver, that causes more problems. So a fever is your body doing its job. Now, if the fever is making you feel bad, then you could put a cold washcloth on your head. There's things you can do to lower the fever, but actually the fever is helping because the bacteria in your body, if it is, or the virus, doesn't like your body being hot, and so it will help your body fight that particular infection. So don't be scared of fevers, and don't think just because you've got a fever, even a fever for a couple of days, that it's bad and you absolutely need a pharmaceutical. That's not the case.
Oh, you guys, I hope you're really listening and taking what Emma is saying in, because this is so true. It's an example of how our bodies are designed to heal. And we have been, I remember just growing up, and every time me or my siblings would get a fever, and, her and I have had this conversation since my mom, she was in healthcare also, but she would say, well, we got to bring it down. We got to bring it down, the Tylenol, the Advil, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And now her and I, our discussions are a little bit different, and she's more in the know and more understanding. And she'll say, "Well, we didn't know any better. We just did what we were told. We just did what we were trained." But in actuality, this is just it's just our body working. It is literally, and when you are constantly suppressing a fever,
Yeah.
you're working backwards.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Now, yeah, I mean, super, super high
of
fever
course.
that can, can be really bad. So yeah, you can put a child, for example, in a cool bath. There's a way to cool them down, but a fever of 102, 103 is not a problem even for a couple of days. Yeah, that's your body working.
Yeah. I saw in your book that you mentioned Tamiflu. And I remember, again, growing up, and when I was like maybe a teenager, even into my 20s, it was really celebrated as something that like wasn't really like that much of it was like a good drug, and it was so much better than, say, some of the
Yeah.
other things. Can you elaborate a little bit on
Yeah,
Tamiflu?
it's horrible stuff. Yeah,
Yeah.
it became, I think it was like 2015 or so. Yeah, so maybe 10 or so years ago. It's absolutely celebrated, and governments were stockpiling the stuff when the bird flu was coming out. And it's, if you actually go on PubMed and type in Tamiflu and look at some of the studies on this stuff, and Relenza, its cousin, I think that's the spray version, just really does horrible things in your body. There's so many side effects, and it's not even that efficacious. I mean, if you actually look at the against a true placebo, your body can naturally fight a virus, and whether the Tamiflu was actually helping or you were getting better anyway, and it's more likely to be working against you. So yeah, there's some really horrible side effects. Again, some mental side effects, and yeah, just go on PubMed and look at some of the side effects of Tamiflu and Relenza, and yeah, they basically said the benefits were overplayed and the harms massively underplayed. And so that's it. You only hear about the good things. Oh, we did a clinical trial, and 30% of people, they shortened their illness from 5 days to 3 days. I mean,
Yeah.
even if that was true, even if that's the case, I'm not sure it's worth it to put this man-made chemical into your body with all the preservatives that are in it and everything that goes into making that palatable and digestible. It's just not worth putting that extra toxin into your body. It's actually putting an extra burden on your immune system and on your liver that's got enough to do trying to get you well.
That's right.
So yes, I'm a little against those
Yeah.
particular
Oh,
pharmaceuticals.
same
Yes, you
with
can tell.
yeah, same with me. And I love that you have a lot of references in your book too, and you point people to studies and other books and so forth. And you guys, if you're not familiar with PubMed, it's just a public database that you can go in and search, what seems like millions of scientific articles really on anything and everything. But yeah, Tamiflu is one of those where, you said they would talk about like the small percentage of whatever it was help, like, whoever it was helping. And I
Yeah.
think, well, of course they're going to talk about that and leave the rest out, because who's funding? I mean,
Funding it. Yeah,
who's funding it?
that's the other. Yeah, if you do go on something like PubMed and start looking at the studies, you really know the first thing you need to do is figure out who are the authors and who
That's
do
right.
they work for and who funded that particular study.
Yep.
It's really amazing the conflicts of interest that are in those studies, because a clinical trial is very, very expensive to run, to monitor people. They have to go to the doctor regularly, have all their bodily fluids tested regularly, and then they're usually blinded. So are they getting the real drug, or are they getting a placebo? That's extremely expensive to run. Well, who has the money to fund it?
That's
Well, the
right.
pharmaceutical companies. So many times you can actually trace back the conflicts of interest, and sometimes it's, well, they're an independent doctor with their own practice, but yeah, you've really got to dig into, are they getting paid by the pharmaceutical company to speak out on that particular drug?
Yeah, and usually the answer is yes. Speaking of pharma, let's get into the juice of this episode, which is, uh, the flu vaccine and the flu shot, because a lot of people still today, even after all of the, I should say, quote unquote, wake up that's occurred between 2020 and now. Because once people started questioning the COVID vaccine, many people started questioning the other vaccines as well, and we're going to get into a little bit of that. But I first want to hyper focus on the flu shot. Thoughts about the flu vaccine? I know this is a whole this is a whole entire episode
Yeah.
just in itself.
Yeah.
And why do you think, well, I mean, we kind of know the answer, but why you think that so many people are still running to receive it? And what is really happening in terms of efficacy and also what people do not know about informed consent?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it amazed me when I moved here 25, 26 years ago, this thing, the flu shot. What is the flu shot? In a lot of most other countries, they don't, they don't have, there's no such thing as a flu shot, right? You just, you get the flu and you go on with life. And advising employers, one of the big preventive measures that employers in the US do is they offer their employees a flu shot. And I just thought that was kind of crazy. And even with what's gone on the last few years, I'm amazed that that is still happening. And my son, my older son that I talked about, he's on a campus. He's at a big 4-year university out of state, not in California, and they're pushing the flu shots on them. They go to class and there's somebody standing outside. Hey, do you want a flu shot? Well, he knows better. So if we go back to what it is, okay. So we call it the flu shot, and if you think back, even pre-COVID, we never called it a flu vaccine because originally, when you look back to see what a vaccine was supposed to be, it was supposed to stop you getting the illness. It was supposed to generate antibodies against the thing that was going to make you sick. And that's what was the definition of a vaccine. And we knew that with the influenza shots, it wasn't necessarily going to stop you picking up the influenza virus. It might stop you getting as sick or getting hospitalized, and that was the idea. And so for years, it's been called a flu shot, not a flu vaccine. But if you then look back to what goes into what is created, how is it created? So influenza itself has many different strains. And every year, the manufacturers don't know what strains are going to be circulating, and they have to start manufacturing it 6 months before they're actually going to need it, and people are gonna want to start using it. So they'll run their projections, and they'll come up with a few strains, maybe 5 to 10 strains that they think are going to be circulating. But there's literally hundreds of different viruses that can get you sick. And if we do call it a season, and I don't think we should refer to it as a season, but if we talk about in the fall, let's just say in the
Yeah.
winter, when it gets cold, a lot of people tend to get sick. They're getting sick from hundreds of different viruses. And so even if they do a good job and they pick the 5 to 10 that there's a lot of those ones circulating, you might get the shot to that, and maybe you'll create the antibodies to that. But so many years they get it very wrong, and the efficacy rates are less than 50%. And if that was the only problem, then okay, fine. You less than 50%, maybe it'll help me against those handful of strains. But the problem is everything else that goes into that shot. So you've got a whole bunch of preservatives, something like formaldehyde, which is a carcinogen, or something like mercury, which is a known neurotoxin. And then because it's going into your arm and you're not breathing it through your nose, like your body was known that a flu virus or a cold virus or some virus like that is going to come through your nose or through your mouth, and then your tonsils get alerted to it. We can get into the tonsillectomy if we can go there in a little bit, because I heard of a friend's son yesterday, an adult son at 18, they removed their tonsils. Terrible, terrible, terrible thing to do. Your
Oh, oh,
tonsils are the first line of defense.
yes.
And so it comes in, yes, your tonsils might get inflamed, but that's them doing their job. And they have lymph tissue in them, and they're fighting the virus themselves. They're also alerting the rest of your body to get going because there's a virus, and if it gets past the tonsils, then we need to fight it. So there's preservatives, there's neurotoxins, there's all of this going into your arm, and then you have to trick your body, because now it's gone into your arm, into a muscle, and not through your mouth. This flu virus, and so there's an adjuvant goes into the virus. And the adjuvant is actually toxic by design because it's attached to the antigen. The antigen is the thing that the shot is against. So like the influenza virus, that's the antigen. And they attach an adjuvant to it so that your body will go after it and attack it. And so the adjuvant could be something like mercury, even
Mercury.
perhaps, or aluminum, sorry, in America. Um,
Yeah.
and so your body goes after it. Well, it's hyping up your immune system so that you're making antibodies. Well, so there's so many problems with the flu shots. People started with psoriasis or some other autoimmune condition, and a lot of that is because there's this adjuvant, this toxin that is amping up your immune system so that you create antibodies to the antigen. And so again, it's working against your immune system. It's firstly trying to trick it because it didn't go through your nose and your mouth and let your natural systems take care of it. And so that creates all of these problems. So again, efficacy rates tend to be fairly low because they're never going to be spot on with what particular strains are circulating. But beyond the efficacy rates being low, it's actually working against your immune system and giving your immune system extra work to do to fight against all the other ingredients that are in there.
Beautiful explanation. I love all of that. Really well said. And this just goes so far against what so many doctors say, which is so ironic, which is, oh, you have an issue with your immune system. Oh, you have an autoimmune disease. Oh, you have psoriasis. Oh, you have IBD. Oh, you have this. Then you definitely need a flu shot to protect yourself against it.
Right.
That could not be farther from the truth. Wouldn't you
Yeah.
agree?
Oh, absolutely. That yes, I just don't get it at all. Yeah, it's going to make things worse for the most
Way,
part.
way worse. And, we've seen that clearly. I mean, we've just seen enough of that just in the last 4 years, although that's a whole nother can of worms. But it just goes to show you that, like, most people, I don't know, I might be not entirely, on board or, I, okay. I think most people, if they knew, is what I'm saying, if they
Right.
knew everything that was in these and if they had proper informed consent and
Right.
proper education,
Yes.
then I think that they would be making different
I,
decisions.
I think so too. I think so too. And that's what I've tried to do in the book. I've tried to write it in layman's language. I mean, there's
Yes.
lots of doctors have written excellent books, but it is pretty complicated. The immune system is insanely complicated. And I've tried to simplify it, but just really to give people a sense that these shots that they might create antibodies, but that is a tiny, tiny part of your immune system. There's all different elements. Like we talked about the tonsils, you've got your spleen, you've got your thymus, you've got your microbiome we talked about already. You've got your bone marrow, which is where all those wonderful white blood cells are made, and your neutrophils and your mast cells and all of these different very, very specialized cells. It's incredibly complicated, but I've tried to simplify it just to give you a sense of all of the different parts that are working together, and just giving you a shot that has you in advance create a few antibodies is not really what the orchestra is all about. The orchestra is all the different parts of your immune system that all work together. And so if you really want to protect yourself against flu season or picking up something from somebody, you really need to address the overall health of your body and all of these different parts of your immune system that all work together. And that's gonna keep you strong. I mean, that's back to terrain theory versus germ theory. Just sticking a shot in your arm, that's just saying, well, it's one for one and all you need is some antibodies. It's way more complicated than that.
Yeah. It's a band-aid approach, and oftentimes it's a band-aid that's not very it doesn't work very well, right? It might be like a soggy band-aid because I just think sometimes it causes more harm than good.
Yeah. Yeah.
What do you have to say about I think most people will, I actually know this because I have heard this from friends and family, and I read about it and I see it on social media, who go into the doctor's office and they've heard, that they should be a little bit more proactive about asking about something like the flu shot when it's presented to them in a doctor's office or a wellness visit or whatever it
Yeah.
is.
Yeah.
And they say, well, can you tell me what is in the shot?
Yeah.
And the doctor says, I I don't have all of that information.
Yeah.
Or I don't really know, because the reality is that a lot of them do
Yeah.
not really know. What would
Exactly.
your advice be in this case?
Yeah, yeah. Again, go do your own research. So there's actually a wonderful website, the National Vaccine Information Center, nvic.org, and all of the different vaccines. It's got all of the information. It's got information, the real story about the illness itself. And what are because doctors will also scare you about, well, the illness itself is terrible and there's no other way around it. You've got to have this shot. So it'll explain about the illness, and then it'll explain about the different shots on the market, because actually a lot of them there's different manufacturers. So then they've got all the ingredients, and then they've got the side effects, and then they've got linked to the clinical trials. And so you can get all very independent information from there on all different kinds of vaccines. So that's a very helpful resource.
Wonderful. I'll put that in the show notes too for
Yeah.
people in
Yeah.
case they would like to refer to it.
Yeah.
I kind of want to branch out a little bit on this vaccine conversation. And again, this is going to be an all, a factual little segment and not opinionated. I want to state that right now. You have a lot of really good, information in your book. There's a particular chapter in which you talk about vaccines in general, not just the
Yeah.
flu shot, because
Yeah.
you do have a flu season,
Mm-hmm.
section in your book. But, you know, well, it doesn't seem it is it is true that a lot of history, when it comes to vaccines and the pharmaceutical industry, has been buried.
Yeah.
And the data is out there, but it has been so suppressed. And I think when people find out about it, they are so shocked. They think, no way, this cannot be true.
Yeah.
And there's a quote, and I have a quote that I actually took from your book. You say, digging into history reveals that the majority of the diseases we've been led to fear had already declined substantially before modern medicines and vaccines came on the scene. Better sanitation, hygiene, refrigeration of food and nutrition take much more of the credit than the modern pharmaceutical industry.
Yeah.
So, can you talk a little bit about this? This is probably one of my favorite subjects to talk about because people are so mind blown if they
Yeah.
have not gone down this road before. But what is some factual information and data about other vaccines such as
Yeah.
polio, measles, etc.?
Yeah. Wow, that's a huge topic.
I know.
So yeah, so I'm a data geek, right? As we've
Yes.
established, right? I've got a couple of graphs in there because it's very, what do they say? A picture tells a thousand words,
Says
something
it's
like
out.
that.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Whatever,
Something along
something
that
like
line.
that. Okay. So if you imagine the graph, and we're talking about, let's say, mortality from infectious disease. I think I start with all infectious disease, and we go back to like 1900, and it's a lot of people were dying of infectious disease, but a lot of it was the nutrition. They had moved to the cities. They weren't able to get fresh fruits and vegetables now, and they're living in terrible conditions. I mean, a lot of us we have forgotten, or we haven't looked into how our grandparents and great grandparents lived. I mean, the conditions were absolutely terrible in the cities. Everybody on top of each other. You had to work really, really long hours to make ends meet. There wasn't running water. People were dying of infectious disease. But then you look at the graph and how it plummets over the following decades of the 1900s as they invented refrigeration. So now you could have an ice box in your house. You could transport fresh fruits and vegetables from the farms and bring them to the cities, and people could get fruits and vegetables. And so they weren't as nutrient depleted as they were back then. We were learning about microbes. So we talked about Louis Pasteur, and so now we're getting into early 1900s, and we understood there were microbes, and microbes could make you sick, and we understood they might be on your hands. So now we tell people and we teach people hygiene, basic personal hygiene. So washing your hands is incredibly helpful. And then things like the water system. So there was open sanitation. There was horses. The main mode of transport in the early 1900s was your horse. And there was horses all over the cities, and they're defecating everywhere, getting into the water systems. And that is spreading a lot of disease. So once you get horses out of the cities, now that's stopping some of those problems as well. And infectious disease is plummeting. And so the first vaccines didn't come out till late 1940s, one or two in the 1950s, 1960s. And it shows this graph of infectious disease plummeting, or infectious disease mortality absolutely plummeting to tiny, tiny percentages. And then there's an arrow as to when the first vaccines came into play. And they had already fought. If you take measles, for example, a really interesting story about measles. And the measles vaccine didn't come out to the 1960s. And already mortality from measles had plummeted by 95% in the US. In Europe, the measles vaccine in the UK, for example, didn't come out till the late 1960s. And by then it had plummeted by like 98%. Very, very few people were dying from measles. And they'd identified it was actually a particular nutrient deficiency, vitamin A, it turned out is particularly bad for measles. So if you get measles and you're having a tough time, you can get a vitamin A supplement and you're going to be fine. You're going to get over it. So other ones, and there's lots of stories, and digging into the history of some of the individual ones is really important. You mentioned polio. Polio is really, really interesting. And
It
I've heard it
is.
even recently. One of the governors said, oh, they're going to change all the rules on vaccines in the new government, and now polio is going to be coming back. Okay.
Right.
Polio story is really interesting. So
Yes.
polio, they identified a virus, but then they also identified that people that were paralyzed had these lesions in their spinal column, and so that's poliomyelitis. It like kind of looked gray when they were opening up the spinal columns, and so but there's so many mysteries of polio that never got solved to this day. We don't know why polio was around mainly in the summers when the kids weren't even in school and so they weren't transmitting it. There were family members that some got it, some didn't get it. A lot of the time there'd be an outbreak and nobody was related to each other. There was no big get together. They couldn't see how it was actually transmitted. Animals were getting polio, and so they were getting paralyzed and having similar symptoms. All of these different mysteries of polio, there's all sorts of them, and they haven't figured it out to this day. And what was happening when you look at the history of the same time, and this is where you get to some of the silos of different history, and you look at the medical profession silo, but then if you look in agriculture around the same time in the 1950s when everybody's talking about polio and so many people getting paralyzed supposedly from polio, they were bringing out these new pesticides. DDT.
Yes.
DDT came out. They used to be using these arsenic-based pesticides, and they used to be dyes, Paris green, and then they found that it was killing bugs. So, hey, let's put this on our produce, and it's killing the bugs. But then they found they couldn't wash it totally off the produce, so people were eating particularly apples. And so it was apple season, and that if you actually again look at the data, the levels of polio skyrocketed when it was apple picking season. That's just one of them. And you can trace the consumption of DDT, the use of DDT, with the levels of paralytic polio. And because one of the other mysteries is in the developing world, the poorer countries, they didn't have polio at all. It just wasn't even there. And so when the so-called polio vaccine came out in the 1950s and it supposedly has caused polio to disappear, then they actually changed the definition of what is polio. And so they changed it to say, well, yeah, so if you're paralyzed but you don't have this virus in your stomach, because they couldn't figure out how this virus started in your stomach and made you throw up, but then somehow got to your nervous system. They have never in a lab figured out how that happens. But they found out that, so they changed the definition for one. So if you didn't have the virus in your stomach but you were paralyzed, they said, oh, well, you don't have polio. So they changed the definition. And to this day, there's data that goes much more recently to the last few years. The World Health Organization has made a big play now to eradicate polio because although we've stopped using DDT in westernized countries, we're using glyphosate and other terrible things as well, but we're not using DDT that paralyzes people. They are using it in places like India. India is one of the biggest producers of DDT to this day, and they still use it. And we just call it, I think they call it polio now in India, but paralytic polio is still very high in India. And they're vaccinating people multiple times a year, and it's still very high. And if you look at the World Health Organization global data, they show like a little line. I think I have this one in my book too. They show a little line of polio reducing to almost zero, but then they have this new disease called, acute flaccid paralysis, AFP, and that's skyrocketing. So as polio disappears, this other kind of paralysis skyrockets. And so really it's just a manipulation of data, whether we call it polio or something else, whether polio was due to this virus they had identified that was in people's stomachs, whether that was causing the paralysis or maybe something else. Because arsenic causes paralysis, lots of other kinds of viruses cause paralysis as well. So again, you've got to dig into the history to really see what the story is and not just kind of take the headlines, well, vaccines eradicated polio. Not necessarily.
I know, I know. And I feel like I bring my parents up a lot, but I've had this conversation with them in recent years, and it's you hear it you hear it a lot, when you talk to people. It's like, well, not all vaccines are harmful or bad because look at what they did with polio. And my face now that I have been educated over the last decade or whatever it is, I'm like, well, actually, you might want to actually hold the phone on that because there is more information. And it's shocking, I think, to a lot of people when they see the real data. Because let's be honest, when a quote unquote disease, whatever the cause, is plummets so drastically and it's 96 to 98% eradicated, and then all of a sudden you have pharma coming in with something to help it, what is the main reason why they're doing that? I mean, 2 plus 2, it just, the answer is right in front of us, and it's really unfortunate because obviously they've done a really wonderful job of pulling the wool over people's eyes. And I think, if there's, you mentioned it in your book, and I'll mention it here. And I just dropped my pen. I just heard one of the co-authors speak on a podcast that I happen to listen to quite often, and he was on there. And the book is called Dissolving Illusions, and you say that that's a really, really good book to go to point to. Friends, if you have not heard of Dissolving Illusions, why don't you say a bit or two about it, because it is a great resource.
It's phenomenal, and Dr.
Yeah.
Suzanne Humphrey is absolutely phenomenal. What I love about it, get a hard copy of this book.
Yeah.
You need a hard copy
Yeah.
because there's so many images in it of newspapers, and I was talking about the squalid conditions that we've just forgotten about that existed so many years ago. She's got pictures in there. They got actual photos, images of the headlines in the newspapers, information that doctors will put out there, signs that you would see on people's doorways, just sketches from artists of the time. And so it's chock full of pictures and images. So you really get a sense of what life was like back then. And when you understand that context, then you can see why we got to this stage of really thinking that we're relying on these vaccines and how they were helpful, and were they even helpful. I mean, the early vaccines caused so many problems and breakouts of the actual disease. I mean, you talk about I think it talks about the Cutter incident where there was a manufacturer and it wasn't manufactured. The polio vaccine wasn't manufactured properly, and everybody that took this particular batch ended up with polio, and a lot of them were paralyzed. So it's very interesting to see all of the history, and they take a few of the different vaccines. So they look at overall infectious disease, and they look at sanitation and horses and all the things that I talked about, and then they look at some specific vaccines and tells you a little bit of the history of why they were invented, if you like, why they said, hey, we've got to eradicate this disease. And some where the inventors, they say, well, why did you create this particular shot? Like hepatitis A, almost nobody dies of hepatitis A. It's extremely mild. And if you ask the inventor, well, why did we create a vaccine? Because we could.
Yep.
Why do you want to eradicate it? Because we can. But we've talked about, why focus on that when, nobody's going to get that sick from hepatitis A, and yet taking the shot that has aluminium in it is going to actually create problem. So we've got to look back to the history to see, how we got to where we are now.
Yeah, absolutely. You said why the focus on that? I'll tell you the focus on it, and it's a dollar sign, because it's sad, it really is sad. I know there are good people out there who are in research and so forth, and they have good intentions, but I think that this industry, we have to remember, is a billion dollar industry, and their main focus is not our health. If it was, things would be a lot different, So it really just, I think the takeaway here is that despite what we have believed and despite what we have heard, whether it's heard from our parents, heard from our doctors, heard from rhetoric given to us by legacy media, whatever the case is, it might not be what is, and it is so important. And that goes for every single other vaccine, right? I mean, it's not just polio and measles and the COVID vaccine or the flu shot. It's really all of them. And I love that you mentioned hepatitis A, and hepatitis B is another one. Don't get me started on that with the babies.
Yeah, it's an industry, right? And any industry, they're in it to make money.
Yep.
It all sounds very altruistic, and a lot of doctors, they want to help people, but the people making the products, they have shareholders and they want to make a profit. And the pharmaceutical and medical devices industries, they are by far the most profitable in the world. If you look at the typical profits, so a typical company, they might make 20-30% profit. Pharmaceutical companies are making 70% profit. And so they're in it to make money, and their shareholders are saying, how are we going to make more money? And you've got to have a new product, constantly be iterating and making a new product. So, you kind of can't blame them because that's their job. Their job is to make money for their shareholders. And how do they make money is encouraging a market. How do you get a market? It's through the marketing, you might call propaganda, but through marketing and whatever it's going to take to increase uptake. And on the vaccine side, if you can encourage a government to mandate a vaccine or strongly recommend a vaccine for every single child in that country, that's an amazing market. That's some very happy shareholders. So that's why I talk about being a better consumer of healthcare. Yes, you need to go to a doctor. They have excellent training. They understand when things are going wrong in the body. But at the end of the day, you're the consumer and you understand your body and what's going to work for you. And so you need to make the decision, should I use this product or not? Is there a better product that's maybe cheaper, that's maybe more efficacious and going to have less damage? I mean, it's what you do when you're looking for a plumber for your house. You're going to check out a few different plumbers, right? You're going to make sure one doesn't wreck your pipes, or one's going to be cheaper or better value than another, or an electrician. We need to do that, or buying a car even.
Yeah.
We need to do that. We need to see that healthcare is an industry, and we need to think about it. We need to educate ourselves, and we need to become better consumers.
Absolutely. And we're going to get into a little bit more of that, hopefully, towards the end of the show. And it just makes me think too, it's not just about you. I mean, I think about and what I mean by you is like us as adults, you guys. When we think about the childhood schedule now, the fact that there's something like, I don't know what it is, it's up to like 75 to 77 vaccines that are given to children. I mean, it is okay that you question this. I mean,
Yeah.
it is okay. And please do not, if you want to say a word or two about that, just walking into a doctor's office,
Yeah.
please do, because I think a lot of parents today are still having a lot of fear because they feel so intimidated about the questions that they have, because things are becoming more out in the open now.
Yeah, yeah. There's two myths that I think that I really want people to look into. So number one is the safety and have they been tested for safety, and then number two is the whole idea of herd immunity. So I want to touch on that
Please
briefly.
do. Yeah, I have that on my
Let's talk about
notes.
safety first.
Yeah, please.
So there's the governments out there, and there's probably stuff on their website that we've tested it for safety and they're fine. You need to dig into what is the testing that they've done. So I think we talked earlier that when the clinical trials typically will test a product and test a placebo. A placebo means it's not the product. And so if you're testing a vaccine that is typically taken by a shot, a needle, then you're hoping the placebo is something like saline, which is completely inert in the human body. The problem is that none of them have been tested against saline. They've typically been tested against another vaccine. This is the big shot that people have no idea about. So the insert to the vaccine, if you ask your doctor to see the insert, it will say in a clinical trial against a placebo. You need to ask the question, what was the placebo? If I just give you one example. So the DTaP vaccine for children, so this is covering diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis, which is whooping cough. So it's DTaP. The more modern one is called DTaP. When they did the clinical trial for that, the placebo was the old DTP vaccine. So they just still covering the same stuff, but it was an older manufactured version that came out in like the late 1940s. And when you look at and the reason they brought out a new one, by the way, is because there were so many problems with the DTP vaccine. Kids were getting hospitalized and having all of these problems. And so when they had the new clinical trial, so the new DTaP versus DTP, and you look at the data, 1 in 20 infants in the new DTaP clinical trial group were hospitalized. But they said, oh, that's okay, because it's about the same as the placebo. But the placebo was the old vaccine. I can't make this stuff up. This is absolutely true. And you can look up the clinical trial, you can look up all this data, and you can go through another book that I talk about in mine is called Turtles All the Way Down. Phenomenal book. And it goes through, and there's links to every single vaccine on the childhood schedule. And one of the tables they have is what was the so-called placebo or the control group in that particular trial. So that's the first thing. So when they say, oh, we've tested it and it's fine, what have they tested it against? So that's individual vaccines. And then the other thing that they have not tested properly is our kids, our children in their first year of life, they're getting all of these different vaccines a few weeks after each other, or even on the same day.
Oh,
Horrifying. They have never ever tested getting all of those vaccines together or on the overall schedule, looking at kids that haven't been vaccinated at all. These studies have been done, but the government hasn't published them. Some phenomenal scientists have risked their careers and done these kinds of studies, and I recommend some books and references. You can look at them. So testing totally unvaccinated kids are massively more healthy than the vaccinated kids that have been fully vaccinated, that have asthma and allergies and Crohn's disease and all of these, type 1 diabetes and eczema and autism and ADHD, all of these problems, fraction of those kinds of problems in the unvaccinated kids or the partially vaccinated kids. So that's the first thing. Dig into where is the safety data and what was the control group. And then the second thing to talk about is herd immunity. This came up so big during COVID because
yep.
people said, well, I've already had COVID. I don't think I need to get the shot. Well, you should get it because, you get your grandparents sick. Okay, so that is all about herd immunity. So when you understand herd immunity, so we have to look at the word immunity. So you can look at that two different ways. One, let's say you're out at a party and people have had the flu and you pick up the flu, but you don't feel symptoms. Okay, but you've got the flu in your body. You might say, okay, I'm immune to the flu, but you can still pass it on to somebody, but you yourself don't get sick. So you could say you're immune. Or you could say, okay, I don't even get it in my body. It's not in my, I'm not sick and I'm not a carrier. And that's also called immune. So two types of immunity. Herd immunity is only that second type. It only applies in the second type, that you don't even become a carrier. You don't get it in your body at all, so you can't pass it on. The COVID shots, they were never, not only weren't they tested for herd immunity, they were never intended to create herd immunity. That's not what they were trying to do. All they were trying to do was prevent hospitalization, prevent you getting that sick. And so to a certain extent, you could say, we could get into that, but to a certain extent, you could say in some ways they could. To start with, and the very first strains, for the first couple of months, they could stop you getting super sick, but you were still a carrier and you were still passing it on. And that's most of the vaccines on the vaccine schedule today. They do not induce herd immunity. They do not stop you passing it on. They can limit the symptoms or they can stop you getting any symptoms at all, but you are still a carrier. And there's been all sorts of trials since in recent years, especially for some of those childhood illnesses. So, even mumps or whooping cough. So whooping cough is a big one, pertussis. And that has come back. There's so much whooping cough nowadays. You don't always get the big hoop, that really horrible sounding cough. It might just look like flu in some people, but it's pertussis. It's the pertussis bacteria. And it was noticed in the last couple of decades that there's so much whooping cough around. Why didn't we eliminate whooping cough? And so they started doing some studies. And when they actually tested it, and they used baboons, they've used some other animals too, and they actually show that the actual vaccine doesn't stop you actually getting the bacteria in your body and passing it on at all. So yeah, so really, a couple of them do induce herd immunity, but most of them do not. And so that's the big reason why people get mad at you. Well, I chose not to get my child vaccinated, and other parents would get mad at you. Makes no sense.
It makes no sense at all. And I think that it's really interesting. Like you said, people get mad and it absolutely debunks. In fact, it's in my notes. It was in my notes to address it with you. People get mad, but it is debunked that the whole like, well, you should get vaccinated for grandma.
Right.
That is not,
Right.
that is rhetoric. That is absolute rhetoric
Right.
perpetuated by propaganda that has been given to you. And
Yeah.
it blows my mind that these professionals out there with white coats on are talking about herd immunity when
Yeah.
it seems like they don't even know. They're just
Yeah.
pushing messages
Yeah.
that the media and the pharmaceutical companies have given them.
Yeah.
They're not even producing correct information. That
Yeah.
they're not.
Yeah. Yeah. The
It
best
blows
thing
my mind.
Yeah, it is. I mean, the best thing you can do to protect grandma is to keep yourself healthy
That's
and
right.
protect your own immune system. And then you're breathing out good stuff. And you want to go spend time with grandma because that will help boost her immune system. Being isolated is terrible for our immune system. It depresses our immune system. And so, yeah, absolutely. There's other ways to keep grandma healthy.
Yeah, absolutely. Moving back to the children for a second, I get I empathize, or not empathize, but I sympathize, I should say, with parents because there's been a lot of parents I think that have had tremendous guilt nowadays that say, well, if I wish I would have known what's coming
Yeah.
out now, or I wish I would have. Um, what do you what do you have to say to parents that are just feeling really fragile in that way? Like they can't, they're having a hard time moving past the fact that they made certain decisions
Yeah.
about their children, and how they can move forward and just, sort of put that to bed, because at the
Yeah.
end of the day, we do the best we can with what we know.
Yeah. 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 I mean, don't look back. There's no point in looking back. That doesn't help anybody. But our bodies can heal. If I just tell the story of my son,
Yeah.
he is so healthy. He is healed. He's at a 4-year college out of state, doing phenomenally on his own. The doctors had told me he'd never leave home. He was so sickly when he was young. Bodies can heal. They take a little bit of time, but you can heal just about anything. I mean, yes, there's some really, really terrible vaccine injuries, and maybe you won't 100% heal from that. But there's no point in looking back. So there's a reason for it. So God has put you in that particular position, has had you made those decisions. There's a good reason. So just look forward. It's just you're going to depress your immune system. Feeling guilt and
Yes.
negativity is really does depress your immune system. So you just got to look to the future, look positive, change things, speak out. That would be fantastic. Help other parents, and just do the best you can moving forward. But even if things look kind of dire right now, it takes time to heal. It can take years. It can take 5 years. Just keep thinking positively. Keep adding to healthy foods and healthy nutrition and healthy behaviors and improving lifestyle. So add more and more. And even if it's been a couple of years and you haven't seen much progress, don't give up. You could still heal and reverse any injuries from the past. And just think positively. And God has you where you are today. Has made you the parent you are today.
That's
Has
right.
put that child in your particular family. So that's what I would do. And if you need spiritual help, then look for that and look to God. But there's just no point in looking back. It's not going to help anybody.
Beautifully said. We've all, like I said before, we do the best we can until we have new information, and then once we have that information, we can make then decisions. And I think that I love that you mentioned, that God God has you in positions to teach and to learn and to then turn around and minister to other people. I am such a believer of that. And, it's kind of like the whole Romans 8:28 thing, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's so much like just
On
turning a
my website.
situation. Yeah. Oh, it is. It is.
Yeah.
I love that. Yeah. Turning things around,
Yeah.
turning the circumstance around and using what looks bad for good, to those that love him. And so it's phenomenal. And I think that those of us in health care and also those of us who have had really big trials, we come to a place. It doesn't always start that way, right? We sort of feel like a victim, and then
Right.
we start to see how there's this bigger path with this bigger purpose,
Yeah.
and so it's important to have the right mindset, like you said.
Absolutely. Mhm.
Speaking of, focusing on the positive things, why don't we get into, because we are all about solutions on this show. We're not just, like I was telling you about earlier, not just about talking about all the things that are wrong, but also talking about the things that are right. So let's talk about some of the ways that you feel are critical and important to look at in terms of how to keep ourselves healthy, especially going into a season, quote unquote, like the flu season. I don't know. I have my own, like you, I think I have my own theories about, is it really a season,
Yeah.
or is it
Yeah.
just like we're probably lacking nutrients and sunshine and all the
Yeah.
things and too much sugar?
Yeah. Sugar, that's a big one. That's a
Yeah,
big
that's
one.
a big one.
Yeah.
A little bit too
Yeah.
much
And
alcohol,
stress,
maybe.
stress of family and stress of
Stress.
your end at work if you're in a sales position or, a
Exactly.
retail position. Yeah. So it gets
Exactly.
really stressful.
Exactly. Finances. I mean, you name
Yeah.
it. There's so many things
Yeah.
that play into this season. But
Yeah.
why don't we go through some of the points of interest, of good interest that you go through in your book?
Yeah. Yeah. So just looking at other kinds of remedies. And so if you're not going to use vaccines and pharmaceuticals, then what else can you do to combat infectious disease? So mitigate stress is definitely number one. Your nutrition is obviously super important. So I like to say cutting out sugar. I prefer that because I have to go kind of cold turkey, because if you keep having a little bit of added sugar, you're just going to keep craving it. So I prefer to say cut out sugar, but definitely cut it down. I'm a foodie. I'm really into food. So there are ways to have the most amazing holiday meals and desserts and all wonderful, wonderful food without, tons of added sugar and the negativity and the corn syrup and all those additives and toxins. So nutrition is absolutely going to be key. And then get outside. I think another part is that we're indoors too much when it gets cold. We have a saying in England, there is no bad weather, only bad clothing.
Oh,
Okay,
I
so
like
buy a
that.
sweater, buy a scarf and a beanie and some gloves and get outside as much as you can. So there is something that I have the science on it, the science papers on the open air factor. It's a real
I
thing,
read this on your book.
right?
I
It
did.
it is, and it's not just sunshine. I mean, we
Yeah.
know that sunshine is phenomenal. My husband was sniffly a couple of days ago. I'm like, get out in the sun and
Yes.
sit on a bench and get some sun on you. So yes, so definitely vitamin D is part of it. You get your sun on your skin. Your skin's going to create vitamin D, and vitamin D is absolutely critical for immune function and lots of different functions. But the open air factor is more than just the sun and the vitamin D. They have actually discovered that outdoor air is germicidal on its own. They've done studies at night. They've done different kinds of studies at different elements. There's a lot of ozone in the air, and ozone is actually a remedy if you're having any dental work. It's a
Yeah.
natural remedy. It's O3, so oxygen is O2, ozone is O3. So it's actually germicidal is ozone. So there's a lot of ozone in the air. So viruses, ultraviolet light. If you go out and you're meeting with a friend and you're breathing out a virus, you're sick or they're sick, it's going to die in the ultraviolet light. But there's a lot more to it. It's kind of like a secret sauce. So just get outside. That's going to be good. Even if you're feeling a little crummy and you haven't got much energy, just go sit outside for a bit and look at nature. So definitely those will be the starting points. And then if you're actually a little bit sick, I would take extra vitamin C in the winter. And if you're getting a little bit of a scratchy throat, I take even more. So vitamin C. It's best if you keep a high level in your blood. So take it throughout the day. So 3 or 4 times a day. You can take like a liquid form, just buy it in a powdered form and put it in. It tastes a little bit like lemon water. And so take vitamin C, 1,000 milligrams 3 times a day, something like that. Vitamin D we talked about. Zinc and quercetin. So I think everybody knows now since COVID, this wasn't new stuff.
Nope.
So zinc can help the viruses not replicate, so it helps you fight a virus. And then quercetin is known as a zinc ionosphere. It helps the zinc get into the cells. And so take zinc and quercetin. I take quercetin all the time because it has lots of good properties and it helps me absorb zinc from the natural food. And then if I'm actually getting a bit of a scratchy throat, I'll add a bit of extra zinc. So zinc and quercetin, super helpful. Things like elderberry. So elderberry has been known for decades, centuries for being antiviral. So yeah, again, scratchy throat. Honey, natural raw honey,
Oh,
phenomenal,
that
right?
is my remedy. I'm telling you right now, and Manuka in particular.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
my husband actually, he's not one to get sick, and he was dealing with not like a quote unquote sickness. I really do. We when we were at our holistic DC and doctor, he even said, he's like, you don't have a cold, you don't have a flu. It's literally toxins. Like he was dealing with a toxic burden of some
yeah,
kind, probably
yeah,
environmental, but
yeah,
he
yeah.
could not stop coughing and clearing his throat.
Mhm.
And I kept telling him every day, like get some honey at
Yeah,
night before you go to
yeah,
sleep. I kid you not.
yeah,
That Manuka honey, the I don't know, it is a secret. It's a secret sauce, but not really too secret.
yeah.
And it was one of the things that really suppressed, and I don't want to say suppressed, but help mitigate that
Super.
constant
Yeah,
uh,
yeah,
he was
yeah,
trying to clear his throat
yeah,
constantly, and
yeah,
that stopped.
yeah.
So honey's a great one.
Yeah, what wonderful for a cough. Ditch the cough syrups and the stuff. Oh,
Oh,
terrible stuff.
terrible
Moments.
stuff. Terrible.
Just a little spoon. My son over at college, he has a little bottle of raw honey. I'll just
Yep.
squeeze it into his mouth if he's been coughing a
I'm
bit.
the same way.
So
I'm the
yeah,
same way.
honey is wonderful. But something else you picked up on, sometimes it is toxins and it's your liver is overworked. So another thing that can help, and if you've got a virus or bacteria in your body, your liver's working very hard to clear that
Yes.
out. So something else that's wonderful is NAC. This was something else that came out during COVID. So it helps you create glutathione in the body. So it's N-acetylcysteine, and it's like a precursor to glutathione, which helps you detox. And so it's very supportive of the liver. And I actually take it every day, NAC. It's just
Wow.
been very helpful. But definitely through the winter, take NAC. So that's another little remedy. Another one that I love, and I think everybody should get used to having, is hydrogen peroxide. And
Oh,
to be honest, I only heard about this during COVID, and so nebulizing it, it's absolutely
nebulizing. I
wonderful.
was just
So
gonna say,
yeah, so hydrogen peroxide, you might think, oh, isn't that stuff I clean wounds with, and it really hurts? Yes, but hydrogen peroxide you actually make in your body. So again, chemically, it's H2O2. And so water is H2O, right? And when it breaks down in your body, it just creates hydrogen and oxygen. So it breaks down basically into water and oxygen, and it helps oxygenate your cells. So it was particularly useful during COVID because people had lungs, the cytokines were going crazy. They had a lot of breathing problems, and it helps both of it with the extra oxygen helps you as well. And so hydrogen peroxide, you get a little bit in your nebulizer, and you'll typically want to dilute it a little bit. So make sure you get food grade, so you can get it online. To get food grade hydrogen peroxide, I'd probably say 3%, and then you'll want to dilute it with saline, not plain water, but saline. So get again sterile saline, and half is usually fine, but you could put a bit more saline in, especially if it's a child. You might want to have a little bit more saline than hydrogen peroxide. Little bit, you put it in your nebulizer and you just breathe it in. And if you're actually sick, then probably for 10 minutes, maybe 3 times a day. But I found it useful. I travel a lot on planes, and you're on a plane and the person beside you is coughing at you the whole plane journey.
Yeah.
I would go home and I'd nebulize for 5 minutes just to kill anything that kind of hung about in there. But hydrogen peroxide is absolutely phenomenal.
Love that.
That's
Love
my
that. And you can
go-to
get
method.
a nebulizer just on Amazon. I mean,
Yeah,
they're everywhere,
yeah,
because I think a lot of people during COVID were like, "Wait, what? What's a nebulizer? Do I have to order that special?" Like I heard that a lot of people were questioning like what even where do I get
yeah,
one? But
yeah,
a
yeah,
lot of people have them in their toolkits at home.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Great. Okay.
Another one of the I should say the remedies that you suggest, or the things that help with just overall homeostasis in the body, which I absolutely loved that you mentioned this in your book, was digestive enzymes.
Oh yeah,
I am a major proponent of digestive enzymes. I've been taking them daily for
yeah,
years,
yeah,
and they have been one of the most effective supplements that I have ever used in my life.
yeah.
Why are these so helpful, or can be so helpful?
Yeah, they're helpful in a number of different ways depending on how you take them. So if you take them just before you eat, then they're going to help you digest the food.
Yep.
And if you've got any kind of stomach problem, gastrointestinal issue, or leaky gut, I'm sure your listeners, a lot of them have heard about leaky gut,
Yep.
or just got bacterial overgrowth and you're not digesting well, and if you're getting bloated and uncomfortable after you eat, it might be that you're not generating enough digestive enzymes. So they can be really helpful to take before you eat, and so that you're getting all the nutrients out of your food. So it can help with gas and bloating as well. Make sure you're digesting everything and you're not creating too much gas when you're eating. But it can also help break down the food. But they're also helpful if you take them on an empty stomach
Yes.
to break down fibrin in your blood cells. So a lot of people I talk to, and I actually my son, he not vaxxed, didn't take the COVID vax, but he was spending a lot of time with somebody that was,
Ah,
and we were worried that he was getting some, he was coughing a lot. We were worried he was getting some blood clots. And I have heard of elderly peoples, and they've been taking a lot of the COVID shots. They have blood clots and problems in their legs and things like that. When you take them on an empty stomach, it helps dissolve those blood clots. It's amazing how the body works. It
yeah.
can get it where it needs to go. So certain particular enzyme, nattokinase, you've probably heard about,
Yep.
is the one that's really good for that. And so you can get something that's mainly nattokinase, and then you would take it on an empty stomach.
Yeah. These
So
are more
yeah,
like
enzyme, yeah,
systemic enzymes. Yeah.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting too, because and he's I will never mention his name because he's very low profile, but during the I mean still but during the 2021 2022 range of the COVID era, when my doctor was seeing a lot of people coming in with problems with the vaccine, and having issues, or being around people who had the vaccine and then they were
Yeah.
developing issues, enzymes was one of the primary things that he was recommending, and he was
Yeah.
seeing such a drastic
Yeah.
increase in health from taking enzymes for like a week.
Yes.
So I was telling, because people were calling me, and I would say, you know what, just give them some enzymes, see what happens. And part
Yeah.
of that is also the pancreas. It helps with the
Yes.
pancreas. And
Yeah.
he was realizing, or he was seeing, that the pancreas was less than productive in a lot of people that were having a lot of issues.
Yeah.
So I just felt like that was so interesting. Again, I think there's a lot more where that came from, and I should probably be really careful with what I say here, but
Yeah.
I mean, it was working,
Yeah.
right? It was working.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
any other notable things that you would like to mention? What
No,
about
I'm not.
colloidal silver? Did you mention
Yeah,
colloidal silver?
yeah, and it depends what it is. When we mentioned parasites and stuff, my kids absolutely adore sushi, and with me, I
Ah,
We said not all parasites are bad, but sometimes if your stomach is otherwise compromised, then parasites can get over. So yeah, colloidal silver is one, and then the other one is grapefruit seed extract.
Oh,
That's
I
another
love
one that I
that.
have in my
Yes.
toolbox. Citricidal is just absolutely excellent.
Yeah.
You take like 3 drops of it, and so again, my son does this because he eats sushi so often, and he's on a college campus. It's probably not very good quality sushi, and so he'll take after a sushi meal, he'll take a couple of drops of this. But it's great, and it's amazing some of these natural solutions because they are imprinted. Again, it's God's design that they will go after the bad but not hurt the good. So
Yeah.
that is the difference between some of these. They are antimicrobial, but they somehow know that they'll just go after the bad stuff that's going to hurt you.
Fascinating. I actually do GSC in my nose. I've been using a nose spray for
People,
many
okay,
years.
yeah,
And it's like by Nutribiotic or something,
yeah,
and it's
yeah,
it's a grapefruit seed extract. And I kid you not, that stuff is really
yeah,
effective.
yeah,
Really,
yeah,
really effective. And like you
yeah,
said, it's not harmful. It's not going to
yeah,
go and,
yeah.
create issues and get rid of all the bad, but it really just goes after the good. So yeah,
Yeah.
there's multiple
Another
ways.
another nose spray though, you remind me, is xylitol. The
Ah, there you go.
xylitol, yeah, nose spray, because xylitol is naturally found in fruits. I think it's an enzyme, and
Yeah.
it's antimicrobial. So yeah, they have Xclear, I think it's called, has a
Yes.
nose spray, and that's really good. Again, if you've
Yes.
been sitting next to somebody on a plane and they've been coughing on you, and you just might have something in your sinuses,
Yeah.
great to clean them out. I mean, this is what I want listeners to take away. There's loads of different remedies, and it's never one for one. The pharmaceutical industry will tell you it's one for one, and you've got to have a professional in a white coat who's gone to school and figured out what that one for one is. Figure out what your symptoms, put a label on your symptoms, and then give you a drug for that. But actually, there's so many different remedies that work in conjunction with your body, and you use the one that works for you, whatever you're
Yeah.
comfortable with,
Yeah.
and just that fits into your particular lifestyle, and try out different ones and see what works best for you.
Exactly. Exactly. There's not a rule book, I should
Right.
say, and that's the beauty of it. And there are so much available. Like you said, there's just so much available. And I think we've been, unfortunately, steered in the wrong direction or programmed to think that this is less effective or, oh, it's alternate. I hate when
Yeah.
people say this is alternative medicine
Yeah.
because no, this is actually the true medicine.
Yeah.
This is the real
Yeah.
medicine. Not
Yeah.
that there's not a place for conventional and, critical care medicine and so
Yeah.
forth, but this is the medicine. This
Yeah.
stuff really is. And so I hate the fact that people say alternative. I try
Yeah.
not to say that as well.
Yeah, and if you look globally, 80% of the world's population use these kinds of remedies.
Yes.
It's only, it's only the people that can possibly afford the
Afford.
astronomical costs of pharmaceuticals that are using those. And
Yeah.
but and yet the longevity in the US is one of the lowest. I think it is the lowest in Western countries now. And
Yeah.
you've got developing countries that people think, well, they probably don't live very long. They do. They're living to their 90s and over 100. Some of the oldest living people in the world are in the poorest countries with no access to any pharmaceuticals whatsoever. So it's going to
We
help
are
you all.
spending the most
Yeah,
on, health care. It's really sick care, but health care. And
yeah,
we are absolutely the sickest. And that right there is proof in the pudding. It should
yeah,
tell you all you need to know, right? What is happening and what we are doing is not only not working, but there is a lot behind the curtain that I
yeah,
think is just designed to not make it work in the first place.
yeah. Oh yeah.
And
When that doesn't work, we've got another pill to fix the other symptom that it then causes.
that's right. It's like the commercials. I talk about this on social media sometimes. It's like you take a pill and there's like the side effects and you see like the person dancing and riding the bikes and like, doing all the weird things in the field, like they're
Yeah,
frolicking in the
yeah,
lilies.
yeah,
And, they're talking about all the side effects that the one pill can
yeah,
cause. And it's
yeah,
like, no,
yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
and these are all just funded
yeah,
by the creators of the
yeah,
drugs themselves. I mean, it's just like this really sick cycle. So we really
yeah,
we have to we have to question and reflect where we've gotten our information, where this, and also the people that we've quote unquote trusted, where they have gotten their information.
yeah,
Not all doctors are quote unquote bad. They're not all out to harm you, but they might not have all of the information that you need to lead a life of optimal health and, longevity. And that's the bottom line, I think.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. As we tie down, would you like to make a comment or two or three about, because I know that you've done so much work in this sector when it comes time Clearly, I need like another cup of coffee. I can't even get my words out now. Or maybe I just need some water. That's probably the better solution.
Yes.
But healthcare and consumers, you've worked with companies who, they provide group plans and benefits for their employees. And, can you say a thing or two about how it is really important to understand what kind of healthcare you are, adhering to, purchasing, and so forth, and how you can make better decisions?
Yeah. Yeah. So particularly in this country, I think a lot of the problem is the employers because 80 million people in the US are covered by their employer's health plan. And so if your employer is paying for the healthcare, you're going to go to the solution that your employer is paying for or the health plan is paying for. So if you have something wrong with you, you're going to go to the doctors that are in the network, and those are the ones that are available to you. And whatever they say to do, typically the pharmaceuticals, they're going to be covered to a certain extent. So that's the route you're going to go. But we are seeing some change that employers are waking up to. Their healthcare costs are going up and up and up year after year, and employees are getting sicker and sicker and sicker. And so, is there another way? Well, there's something in the corporate world, we call it corporate well-being, and they will then offer other kinds of solutions. So let's say you've been diagnosed with diabetes, and instead of going on a drug, metformin or something, there'll be another program that will give you an app on your phone and a coach that you can talk to who will help you change your diet and change your lifestyle, and it will all be tracked on your phone or whatever. Some of them you'll be on a continuous glucose monitor for a few weeks just to kind of see what foods affect you the most, and it'll literally be tracking. You'll be looking at it on your phone, and then they'll be looking at what you're eating, and you have a coach and all of this information, and it will actually change and get you off the drugs. And employers are seeing some of these solutions, and so the diabetes was the first one, but now for like autoimmune conditions, so you've been diagnosed with lupus or rheumatoid arthritis or multiple sclerosis, those drugs are like $30,000 a year. And often your employer's plan is paying for the majority of that. You might have a small copayment, but that is really expensive. And so, again, there are solutions now where they look at the root cause of that illness. Are you allergic to something? Is it toxins in your environment? Is it a trauma that happened years ago? What is going on in your life? And you'll have a coach that will look at all of that. You'll talk to a functional medicine doctor, which is a doctor that's looking at the root cause and not just doling out pharmaceuticals, but they're using everything that modern medicine has available, but also these other kinds of remedies that we're talking about, and they will get you off those drugs. And so for the employer, they're going to save $30,000 a year on you, and
Wow.
you're going to be healthier, and you're going to be more productive at work. So this is starting to come in. There's other kinds of solutions for all sorts of different ailments that you might have. And the employers are now supporting things like nutrition coaching and things like this. My concern, though, is that the employers are still focused on the traditional health plan, and they put all of their dollars and all of their investment in the traditional health plan, and the communications are all about, well, you've been labeled with a particular disease and then you're over here, but we'll try and stop you getting sick in the first place, and that might be tagged as well-being or wellness. And what I'm trying to do with employees is flip the script on that and start, I call it the wellness first approach. And so as soon as you've got any kind of ailment, let's try and get the employees to a functional medicine doctor right away to try and address what's going on in their symptoms and reverse their health and get them to good health right from the get-go, and not medicalize them from the get-go with pharmaceuticals, because then you get side effects, and then you need another pharmaceutical, and it just
Yeah.
gets more and more expensive. So there are these phenomenal solutions, but employers aren't quite there yet with leading with these other kinds of solutions. But I also advise the solution providers, right? So some of these startup companies, they have phenomenal programs. Literally, you're paying $100 a month, and you're essentially getting functional medicine for
Wow.
$100 a month. Yeah, it's really
Wow.
phenomenal. Your supplements and things will be on top of that, but
Yeah.
they're advising you on the supplements that you need. They're advising you on what diet might work best for you, what to eliminate, any allergies you might have, things like that, what toxins might be in your life. So they're getting to know you really well. And to access that for $100 a month is really revolutionary. And a lot of employers, they actually self-insure their plans if they're big enough. So instead of relying on the insurance company to decide what's covered, the employer can decide what's covered. And so educating, part of my role now is educating employers that functional medicine, while it might look more expensive, Because when you go to a functional medicine doctor, they're not just a 10-minute appointment where they say, oh, yeah, symptoms like 10 other people I've seen today, and here's your prescription, and off you go. You got the flu, take some antibiotics just in case, and
Right.
off you go, as you were saying. Instead, well, let me find out what else is going on. What are you eating? And I'm going to spend an hour with you, and you fill out a whole questionnaire, and then they get to know you, and then they'll do non-standard testing, some other kinds of tests, not just the standard blood test, but some other kinds of tests. They'll look at your hormone levels and your vitamin D levels and some other nutrient levels. They'll look at allergies, are you allergic to dairy, things like this, or gluten. And they'll look at all of that, but it can be very expensive if you're seeing an MD. Many of functional medicine doctors are MDs as well. They might be naturopaths, they might be integrative, and then they got some other kind of qualification, but they're expensive to see them. But instead, if the employer would cover those doctors, you are getting people well and healthy. You'll have a few doctor's visits, and then they won't need to see a doctor again because then they're healthy. And maybe they're just having some supplements every month, instead of they get labeled with a disease and now they have to see a doctor constantly, and then they're taking medication, and then the side effects, and then they need to see another doctor, and it just escalates from there. So so the listeners, look to see what your employer is offering today. Look to see if they offer any of these alternative, if I can just use the word, I don't like the word either, but
Yeah.
you know what I mean, everybody
Yeah.
knows what I
Yeah.
mean.
It really is
Um,
alternative though right
yeah,
now still. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So people will know what that is. And then if your employer doesn't have one of these other programs, look into the insurance company. If it is an insured program, you're with Aetna or Cigna or United, go onto their websites, because sometimes they have these other kinds of solutions that you can get through them as well. And you quite often you can get to a dietitian and pay nothing,
Wow.
because a lot of dietitians and nutritional counseling is covered, even under traditional conventional health plans, it's covered. And so now you need to be careful who the dietitian is, because if they're very conventionally trained,
Yes.
they're just looking at your
Yes.
macros, how many carbohydrates and how much fat you're eating, and oh, don't eat saturated fat, which is very bad advice. You need to be eating really good, grass fed, non-toxic, pasture raised. All of that is very important. Don't eat the toxic stuff. But to eliminate saturated fat is actually pretty bad, especially going into the winter.
Yeah.
You need some good fats for your brain and your immune system. So
Yeah. Yeah. Wow.
good overview.
Wonderful advice. It's funny because as you were speaking about this, which just makes so much sense to me, I was thinking, wow, what a concept. Why don't we just look for actual solutions to get well,
Yeah,
and it ends up saving money in the long run for these employers and so forth. But it's still like not the conventional way, but let's hope that maybe we'll head that way more and
I hope
more
so.
as
I hope so.
as the tide turns. I mean,
Yeah,
when we can hope, there's
yeah,
always
yeah,
hope. And I was talking about this last night, but I feel like over the last 4 years or 5 years, we've seen so much turmoil and so much sadness and so much hardship, and people have lost their lives and people have been vaccine injured and all these things. But there has been this tremendous wake up that is just sweeping not only this nation but the world. And again, I think God's got his hand in it all, because been these really negative things that have happened, but there's been such mass
yeah,
exposure.
yeah,
And so I feel as though with this exposure comes more information, which then places the responsibility on us to feel empowered, to be able to get educated and do a better job. Because in the end of the day, it's always been about us. Our health has always been in our hands.
mhm,
And it doesn't matter who's in office, who's
yeah,
elected,
yeah,
who's in charge of us that, is with the white coat in the office. It
yeah,
really is about us and it's about our decisions. And we have a choice every single day
yeah,
and how we go through our days, our routines, how we feed ourselves, how we feed our children, what we take in, what kind of media we listen to, and all of that. It's always been about us. And so I think that if there's anything that people have learned through the last 4 or 5 years is, wow, it's time that I really pay attention. Wouldn't you agree?
exactly. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
your health is in your hands, and some people can feel overwhelmed. I mean, I got to the end. There's a
Yes.
lot of information in my book. I chopped a lot in there
So
to
good.
give, as I say, that 50,000 foot overview, so you can see the whole picture. But I was a little bit worried that people would kind of feel overwhelmed. So then, at the end, you haven't got there yet. But right at the end, I kind of say, okay, with all of this information, I ask a few questions as to where you should start, because it can
Mm.
feel overwhelming, like, well, I don't understand. And especially if you are diagnosed and you've got a problem right now and you're not feeling well, that can be even harder. Like, I'm
Yes.
not feeling well, I've got all of these ailments, how do I even know where to start? I don't understand how my body is working. Just start somewhere. I talked towards the end about micro habits. We talked about water. you know
Mm.
just
Hmm.
drink a glass of water on waking up in the morning. That's a micro habit. It's too small to fail.
Yeah.
And so just start with something like that. Just
Yeah.
drink some plain water, pick one thing and do it for a week. And at the end of the week, you're like, I did that every day. And when you do something constantly every day, something little, it just becomes natural. And
Yeah.
then gradually add something after that, and then see what interests you. So I sort of asked some questions about sort of your lifestyle and your culture, so to see which of all the different modalities that I talk about, are you into more of a herbalism approach, or botanicals? Do you like smells and essential oils? Are you into more of that orthomolecular approach and all the vitamins and the supplements? Are you into precision medicine? Do you like to wear an Apple Watch and track all your different things? Where are you? What are you comfortable with? And then that will help you. And I sort of give you some guidance on where you might want to start. So it's just, and it doesn't mean stop going to all of your doctors. You
No.
know, talk
No.
to your doctors. Their diagnoses are helpful. The tests they're going to have are hopeful. Having somebody to talk to. You don't have to do everything they say, though. That's the difference. So go talk to them, get their information. It's their opinion based on their mode of study, and then take that back, make some notes, and then go and do your own little bit of research. And I have a lot on my website. So some of those solutions that I mentioned that employers can offer, you can go to yourself. So what
Awesome.
you could do, if you're in an employer's plan and if there's choice in that plan, you could opt for a really high deductible plan. I mean, I did. I don't use conventional healthcare at all. But when I was in the corporate world, I had this great plan, but I took the one with the highest deductible so that I paid the minimum to that. And then I could spend what I saved on these other kinds of alternative solutions. And so some of those programs, those startup companies with these apps and nutritional guidance and coaches and things like that, they're on my website. I have like a health solutions little area with lots of websites and lots of companies and things like that. So just start somewhere. And,
Yeah.
and as I say, if you've been diagnosed with something, just pick one thing. How can I improve my immunity this winter? And just whether it's water you started with, maybe it's getting outside more. Hey, you know what? I'm going to take my morning coffee sitting out in the sun on my doorstep. So just start with those micro habits. And so rather than taking things away, nutrition is really hard to change. So I have a section, I call it food hacks, just to get you
Oh, I saw
started.
that.
So
Yeah.
yeah, so just start. I'm not saying, change everything you eat.
No.
So I say, look at your breakfast. Let's just start with breakfast. And for a month, focus on maybe improving breakfast. And I have some ideas in that. And just do that for a month or so. So add, rather than take away, add some good things. And then you'll start to feel a little bit better. You'll get, things will become a little bit more second nature. Don't change it all at once, because you will fail.
Yeah.
We're getting to near the end of the year, and like January the 1st, oh, I'm going to do this, and this. And you stumble. Day 3, you stumble, and then you give up on everything.
Yep.
So that's why I talk about micro habits, and just pick one a week, add something every week. And then maybe for the year, maybe you'll just pick, one thing that I'd like to get off this medication. I have a friend, and maybe 20 years older than me, and was on so many psychotropic medications that had been added over the years. She'd been in a car accident many years before and had been put and had had a seizure or something, so was put on some anti-seizure medication that was never reviewed, and then it gave side effects, so was put on another one, was on like 4 or 5 psychotropic medications, and her brain, she was losing it. Very, very intelligent person, could barely even read anymore. So we focused on getting off the medications, and some of them were heavy duty that you have to titrate down. So we added some supplements and some things like drinking more, hydrating more, and changing some of the things she was eating, getting off gluten. But then the plan for the year was, I want to reduce my medication. So that could be something, and it has to go slowly if you're on some heavy duty medication. So yeah, don't go too fast. Don't walk walk before you can run, add some micro habits. If you insist on picking a big plan for the year for next year, just make it something like that, like reducing my reliance on medication, or maybe tweaking my diet, not, oh, I'm going to change everything overnight.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's fantastic advice. And it's a surefire way to fail if you just dive in head first and want to tackle everything. It's so overwhelming, and it's overwhelming on your nervous system. And I
Yeah,
know that just from personal experience. I've done that before. I've tried
yeah,
to tackle, 60 different things and it just doesn't work. So
yeah,
it really is. And you feel so much more accomplished when you pick, one or two things at a time to focus on, because then it's so much more attainable. And when you're actually doing it, you're like, wow. And
yeah,
that in and of itself can literally cellularly change
yeah.
your
Oh yeah,
body, because
oh yeah,
you, not just what you're doing like drinking the
yeah,
water, but the
yeah,
the the actual positive effect, and the
for
way
sure.
that you're like, wow, I
Yeah,
am really doing this. I mean, that
yeah.
that really has some sort of, I think it's very valid, how that positive reinforcement has an impact on our cells, so it's just fantastic advice. Your book, I highly, highly recommend that you guys check it out. The title is How to Be a Healthy Human: What Your Doctor Does Not Know About Health and Longevity. I am so impressed so far. I cannot wait to read the rest of it. Like I said earlier, I love how it's set up. I love how easy it is to read. I love how I personally was not feeling overwhelmed reading it at all. I just feel like there's so many reasons why I love the way that you tackled this. It's just fantastic. I can't say enough good things. I really can't. So I highly encourage you guys to check out Emma's book. Where else can people find you if they want to learn more about you and your work?
So my home base is my website, which is just emmatekstra.com, Tekstra. And then you can get to other places. I have a Substack you can sign up to.
Oh,
I'm writing almost every week with, yeah, helpful articles, try to be as positive and helpful with those. I do have some courses, my online courses that people can take them. They're more sort of in the corporate realm, but I have one or two that are more for the individual. I have a free one on there, actually, if you're not ready to read the whole book, that's just kind of like a 45-minute. I touch on sort of the key themes through the book.
oh,
So yeah, each
awesome.
of sort of the different chapters. And so that might be a helpful one. But yeah, home base, emmatekstra.com.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, I will be sure to list all of this in the show notes, as well as a link to her book. Again, you can find it probably where books are sold, but on Amazon. I'll
Absolutely.
throw that link
Yeah.
in there as well. And I will
Okay.
be finishing it because
All
it's
right.
just that's a fantastic read. So I
Let
appreciate
me know
that
any
so
questions.
much. Yeah, absolutely.
To help.
It's been such a pleasure. I have thoroughly enjoyed this conversation so much. You've given us a lot of food for thought, but also it's just been really nice to discuss things that, how do I say, oftentimes I have a hard time discussing, in certain circles, but also on
Yeah.
social media. This stuff is very difficult still today to
Yeah.
talk
Yeah.
about. And so it's nice having a place that we can have an open conversation about things that I think really need to be spoken more about.
Absolutely.
And and then people can do what they want with the information, and
Yeah.
do further research if they so choose. So
Yeah.
I appreciate it so much. Thank you for being here. It's been
Thank
a
you for
true
having me.
honor.
That's been great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Emma. All right, you guys, we will see you on the next episode. Thank you again for listening, and I hope that you have a blessed day.